Sometimes you find similarities between games, be it mechanics, an art style, or just general themes. Sometimes a game may remind you of another game you don't really care for. And sometimes, once in a blue moon, when the stars align, a game may remind you of a series of games you don't care for, and yet somehow, in this one game, it comes together in a way you really enjoy. And such is the case, for me, with Puchi Carat. Now the plot to Puchi Carat is, well, basically 100% of it was removed from the North American version. Seriously, all the dialogue, all the banter, all the written words in this game, completely gone. Near as I can tell, it's about a bunch of magical chaos emeralds descending from the heavens, and now each of the characters who have found one fight it out to try and get them all. I guess. Okay, so story is far from the high point, especially in the North American version. The importance here is gameplay. Now to kick off the gameplay, you are given a choice of two modes. A versus mode, where you compete against various different computer opponents in some sort of story, as well as a one-player skill exhibition mode. Let's just start with the versus mode and talk about the mechanics a little bit. But before we can do that, we have to pick our character. I, of course, immediately gravitated towards the half-naked bunny girl for the obvious strategic advantage she would provide. Anyway, since we've got our character picked, let's get into the versus mode. A mode that, at a glance, I would start off by saying is sort of like a mix between Breakout, Puzzle Bobble, and Puyo Puyo. And I know that sounds a little bit weird, but I'll walk you through it. Essentially, you are given a ball and a paddle. You have to bounce said ball off said paddle to destroy gems hanging from the ceiling. Kinda like Breakout. But to tense up the situation a little bit, as time goes on, more gems will descend from the ceiling, similar to Puzzle Bobble. In addition, if you manage to destroy a gem that is holding a cluster of other gems down below it, you will knock them all down at once, also like Puzzle Bobble. And should you destroy enough blocks before bouncing the ball off your paddle again, you will send a series of trash blocks to your opponent, thus making their life far more difficult, dicking them over completely. It's fantastic. Now the main goal of a versus match is to try and destroy as many gems as possible, all while flooding your opponent's field with gems. Once the gems hit the line at the bottom of the screen, it's game over. However, in games like Breakout, you generally game over if you miss the ball with your paddle. Not so with Puchi Carat. Instead, if you miss your ball with your paddle, the ball will simply bounce off the bottom of the screen and return up. But you are penalized for this, causing 3 rows of gems to descend from the top. And this, along with trash gems from your opponent, can immediately turn a match on its head in an instant. And I can tell you, it's great when you do it to your opponent. It's incredibly satisfying to come back from behind and basically be untouchable. But it absolutely is the worst when it happens to you. In addition, while your character is sitting there cheering you on in the background and panicking while you're screwing up, the character you chose actually does have a significance. Each character has a different pattern to which they send trash blocks to their opponent. Now I personally didn't notice too much of a difference myself, but it was an interesting concept in general. Now let's talk about the one-player exhibition match. Essentially, it does away with the opponent entirely, thus removing the trash blocks mechanic, and instead simply has you trying to destroy as many gems as you possibly can before being overrun. And of course, still remains the punishment for missing your ball, dropping 3 rows of gems at once. You miss again, you drop another 3. And while this can immediately spell disaster for an exhibition match, or any match really, you can actually use this to your advantage. By dropping an additional series of rows, you might reveal a row above it that is seriously weak, essentially being held together by 1 or 2 gems, which you could destroy fairly easily, thus giving you a lot of breathing room and scoring you a decent number of points. But it's definitely a gamble. It does, however, work a little bit better in Exhibition though, because the Exhibition mode is a preset generation of patterns. If you've played it all the way through once, you'll at least have a general feel for where they're coming from next time because it doesn't change. at least within the same difficulty. And honestly, I found myself gravitating towards the exhibition mode a lot more than I was the versus mode. It could just be that I really don't care for the trash blocks mechanic, and I found it far more enjoyable just to try and master the mechanics so that I could beat the game myself under my own power, rather than going up against a computer opponent, which really did dominate me pretty hard because I'm awful at these games. But either way, this game gives you two different ways to play. Exhibition's great for honing your skills and testing yourself. Versus is incredibly tricky and really does like to dick you around sometimes, but fun all the same. The soundtrack to Puchi Carat is really well done. It's mostly very upbeat, catchy, and happy. Honestly, for the past week and a half, I've been randomly finding myself humming the theme to the exhibition match, because it is really catchy. In fact, I ended up having to use it for the theme of this review. All the different characters are voice acted, and I think the voice acting works for their personalities. And I think overall the audio production is quite well done. I think special mention should be drawn to the presentation, because as I said, I don't really care for games like Breakout. I really can't stand Bust a Move. Puzzle Bobble's a little bit better, but again, I think that's just because of its art style. And if I don't ever have to play Puyo Puyo ever again, it won't be too soon. I think that this game's aesthetic, filled with bright pastel colors, beautiful backdrops, really well detailed and animated characters, each with their own personalities, as demonstrated through the animation, such as this crazy guy. I think that the visual presentation of this game definitely appealed to me. I like bright, colorful games, and I think this definitely attracted me to it. So in general, the presentation all around is excellent. It's an arcade game, and it's definitely not a fair one. It does like to kick you when you're down, and it loves to kick you when you're ahead, and pretty much game over you instantly. Even if it's just the slightest mistake, this game will punish you hardcore for it. And I think that definitely lends itself to a lot of replayability. It's definitely one that you're going to come back to because it's just a great, fun game to play. My only real gripe with Puchi Carat, and this is only because I played it on the Taito Legends PS2 disc, is this game screams for paddle support, and I'm not sure this game does. I'm honestly not sure if the PS2 even has a paddle controller, but the PS2 controller works okay, and I definitely appreciate that there's a speed up button to try and give you a bit more speed where you need it, but it definitely feels like it needs a paddle controller. But I definitely think Puchi Carat is definitely one reason you should own the Taito Legends 2 compilation, and honestly, there aren't a wild number of other games on the PS2 version that I would recommend you get it for. If you can get the Xbox version, absolutely do it, because you get a couple more awesome games that the PS2 version didn't. I hear the PC version also got the same games as the Xbox version, so that version might be more viable for you. But in general, I would say this is a game that would sell that compilation to me. Well, that and Darius Gaiden. In the end, I think Puchi Carat is the exception that proves the rule. I don't like games like Breakout, I can't stand games like Puyo Puyo, and the only Puzzle Bobble I like is the actual Puzzle Bobble that's bright, colorful, and cheery. And yet somehow, when you throw them all together, and the stars align, once in a blue moon, you might just get an amazing game like Puchi Carat. A game that even someone who doesn't like games that are very similar to this can end up loving.